for it.
There's still people coming in. So we'll let give them 10 more seconds, then we'll get going. What I would say in advance of us starting is that we'll be sending out the recording of this session. There will be an opportunity for everybody to request any slides or a deck if needs be. So you don't have to do quick screen grabs as we run through on the fly. We are just trying to work out our questions and chat. Ella and I, as panelists, are not quite able to see your questions, but that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't put them in, because we're going to try and sort that out during this webinar. So please fire your questions at us, and then at least we'll get them and be able to give it a go when they pop up, or even afterwards at the very worst case. So welcome everybody to our webinar today, Critical Strategies, Building the Learning Organization of the Future. This has been a incredibly popular webinar. We're extremely keen to know how you heard about this and what interests you about the session today. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name's Andrew Jolly. I am the Director of Strategic Design here at Leo. My quote for the day is, I was just trying to think of a new one, and I've said trust must be at the heart of any successful learning strategy. I've been thinking about this learning strategy a lot recently, and I believe that for learning to work in any organization, the learners need to trust that the learning is powerful and is going to help with their performance. That their managers need to trust that the learning is an extremely worthwhile activity for them to enable their performance as a team, as an organization, or as individuals. And the organization needs to absolutely trust that learning is the way ahead. And it's something really close to our heart.
Great. And I'm Ella Richardson. I'm the Learning Design Director at Leo. I'm delighted to be here with you today. And as we were talking about the organisation of the future, it made me think, really at times of change, it can be tempting to revert to what we know and what makes us feel secure. But looking forward, the thing that I always try and hold true and really ask of others is to think about what you can do now to predict the future, ultimately by creating it and bringing it to life.
Thanks, Ella. So let me just tell you a tiny little bit about who we are. That's not the point of this session, though, because we're going to be talking about other organisations and organisations that we very much work for. However, it's important to tell you that we are, both Ella and I are from Leo, and we're part of the Learning Technologies Group, which is a very exciting group of different organisations all pulling together in the cause of performance through people in organisations, whether that is on the right hand side of this diagram, performance software platforms, learning management systems, many of you may recognise there, and tools such as our partners in Watershed, a learning analytics platform, authoring tool Gomo that you'll recognise, and many other teams who are responsible for systems that drive recruitment, diversity and such like. And on the left here you'll see content and services within Learning Technologies Group. There's us in Leo, there's our partners in our governance, risk and compliance team, our partners at Preloaded who are games and immersive specialists, and of course, as of late last year, our partners around the world in GP Strategies, who we're working very closely with now, which is extremely exciting. And moving on, just to say a little bit about Leo, we are the content, learning content specialists. Alice, if you just move forward one slide. We talk about unlocking your future through learning, which means you as an individual and you as an organization. And we're strategists. Ella and I are both in the consulting strategy team. We're learning designers. We deliver and create content that works. and the platforms and technologies that do that transparently for our clients. So, quick look at what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so in the short time that we're getting together today, first Andrew's going to share how we ran a large live virtual workshop at the end of last year with a multinational audience, and we're going to look at some of the output of that. And then we're going to dive into some of the lessons and takeaways from that, so key strategies that were identified as a feature of the organisation of the future. So looking at the new reality of hybrid learning, talent mobility, and exactly what we mean by that, human-centric learning and really why that's so important now, learning in the flow of work and its resurgence, and finally building an MVP mindset. So do pop questions in as they occur to you and we'll answer them as we go, but we'll also be staying on for a bit of time afterwards if you'd like to carry on the conversation.
Perfect. So a little bit about the big breakout. So we decided to talk to you today about building the learning organization of the future because we were lucky enough to gather 25 C-level operatives within our industry late last year for a two-day workshop defining an answer to that specific question. What is the future learning organization look like? So we ran what we called the big breakout. If you move on a slide, Alice, you'll see we used Miro, which is our preferred tool of choice for large workshops such as this. I imagine a lot of you use it. If you don't, check it out. It's become our go-to tool for all virtual workshops really now. And moving forward, you'll see that we ran a series of sessions around different things like what is our ideal learner of the future. We got some amazing insights there, and onwards we saw we looked at key trends and we started to sort them through. We built up what we'd call a masterpiece gallery. You can move through these, Alice, and started to create and consolidate what we were finding over these 2 days. And this slide here shows us beginning to put together 5 or 6 core trends that were emerging as of the moment strategies, approaches, trends that absolutely are at the core of the learning organization right now and in the future. And that is what we're drawing on today. So let's move on to the first of those.
Great. So I'm going to start with hybrid learning, and hybrid learning being one part of blended, that part of the synchronous experience. And what we mean here is the live delivery of learning in both virtual and in-person environments. So people being in a room plus others joining virtually. And the key thing here being everyone sharing an experience and joining from different places. So everyone being equal critically. One of the things we've often heard is it's like physical, but with everyone else dialing in. Not at all. It's actually more akin to designing a virtual session than an in-person one. And Alice, if you just move on. So on the next slide, what we heard as really the demand coming through strongly from the big breakout was because organizations are having to adapt and really work in a different way. That's why this has really come to the fore. So remote working, blended teams being more commonplace, whether desk-based, home-based, or having satellite locations, we need to really rethink the use of technology and how we're designing and delivering to meet the needs of people, like completely regardless of the work environment that they're in. And because we need these new ways to engage, it can be really much more practical to offer a hybrid solution, and it offers choice. So we're meeting people where they are and giving them adaptable experiences rather than kind of forcing these binary choices. The real benefits of this are accessibility, so like not limiting access, and also bringing like real new perspectives and diversity of thinking into one conversation. So yeah, some of the key blocker really that we heard was it's new and different. The skills required feel really different from traditional facilitation. There's a lot more to think about for facilitators and a need to upskill people. So that's kind of led to a real hesitance to get started. we've heard a lot about, you know, what ifs and what if people don't like it. And I think the new logistics can be slightly daunting, but learners are expecting this kind of flexibility. It's catering to a variety of needs, and we're hearing that people are willing to be patient. So another key enabler of hybrid is actually management supporting this kind of like experimentation and new modality, generally because the business need results, and you know, old mechanisms aren't fit for purpose. Finally, we have the technology to enable it, and this technology, you know, especially given the last couple of years, has been cascaded and really well adopted into many organizations. So people are very comfortable exploring the capabilities of technology. So from that, we're through on hybrid. We're going to jump and spin over to Andrew and talent mobility.
Thanks, Ella. So talent mobility was the second. By the way, these are in no order of importance, but the second that we've chosen to talk about. It really is, you know, it is for sure a buzzword of the moment. So we thought we'd explore very, very quickly what we mean by talent mobility. Moving forward, I found this quote in one of our partners in Learning Technologies Group, PeopleFluent. So their definition encompasses an organization's ability to understand skills, experiences, career interests of your employees. And I really like this because it's not about just how to move people around an organization faster. They say the goal is to move employees into new roles internally, where existing skills can be sharpened, new skills can be developed. I see this talent mobility as a way of seeing your people. It's a way to reacting to their needs and yours in a very positive way. However, obviously, it is responding to, you know, a huge challenge that industry and organizations face right now, which is the speed of change and the rate of the pressure to be agile and move fast. And obviously in any organization, you have a number of extremely talented people. So what did we hear on our workshop? We heard that talent mobility is about understanding the knowledge, skills, attitudes of every role and knowing what good looks like in order to be able to fill those positions. It's about connecting recruitment, performance, knowledge and learning teams, which is really, really nice. I love that. And it's closely connected with recruiting smartly. It's about developing flexibility, career pathways, enabling movement between roles, and effective learning and growth to meet programs to meet people's needs. So that's the kind of the learning component of that. And let's look at some of the blockers and enablers. So blockers that came through were culture, one that is not about moving people around, and one that perhaps an old-fashioned culture of, you know, you're in that job and you're in that job until such time as I don't know when. It's about visibility and seeing what's there, and the if you don't have that visibility, you're not gonna move. You may not have the systems, and if organizations are changing fast all the time, then it's unlikely that they're going to have the sort of sustained moment where they can start to look at really what they need to do themselves within their own organization. The enablers are performance consulting skills within HR, a kind of career mindset, onboarding and strategic recruitment. And there was a really nice quote here, which was, is your thinking in your organization past forward or future back? We think that might be an Elon Musk quote. I'm not sure whether that makes me trust it more or less or whatever, but it's an interesting one. I think what it means is, you know, are you in the past looking forward to your position now and doing things the old way in order to try and push through, or are you looking at what your goals are and looking back from that point as to what you need to do to reach them, which is really nice. And it's sort of, you know, goal-based thinking, which is how we as learning designers think all the time.
Yeah. Moving on to the next
Keep asking your
approach.
questions. Sorry, Ella, I just thought I'd say for anybody who's here and wondering why we're not responding to your questions because we have a slight technical hitch, keep using questions panel if you can, and we will try and answer them. We'll come up with some questions for each other to cover towards the end of this session.
We have had a really nice comment from Evelyn about her work in SEN and how COVID's really helped to encourage engagement virtually and really shift to virtual learning. Evelyn, I think this will also be something that might resonate with the kind of work that you do in taking a human-centered approach. Now, human-centered design really helps us to better understand people's needs, motivations and their concerns, but it can also make for a much more efficient and flexible design process. Learner-centered design is ultimately, for me, about taking data and insight from real people and then also promoting social connection, emotion and personalization, ultimately in service of cultivating human qualities. So things like curiosity and compassion. And next, why this is so really important for the organization of the future, it's about bringing emotion and empathy into design. It's being really targeted and sensitive to the needs of the individual rather than just the organization first, which ultimately enables us to deliver for organizations, of course. And often it's about providing personalized pathways that are really focused on practice rather than knowledge inputs, and giving people ultimately agency and freedom to choose those pathways, their own pathway. And it can lead to what we call zero-based learning, and that's something that's designed specifically around what people need, and essentially no more than that. Now, in the research that we did, some of the key blockers that were identified were the investment. It can be really time and cost heavy, but human-centered design in the learning space can also really require a deep learner buy-in and engagement, because often if we're expecting them to be self-directed and that's a shift and they aren't comfortable with that kind of responsibility, they can get really overwhelmed with choice. So another finding was that it really needs to be simple and well structured, because complexity kills here. As with a lot of shifts in approach, we recognise that management change can be needed, and that senior leadership support for that shifting approach is critical, or can be a blocker. And finally, data and analytics, especially if you're changing tools. However, having said that, like I kind of said earlier, we do have the technology and the data available to us to generally prove ROI. And we can and should be starting to think about linking to talent mobility, like Andrew was talking about earlier, by actually mapping learning to the capabilities that are needed in the organization. And in doing so, we can then hone the utility of the learning by, again, only really providing what's absolutely necessary. Building on human interaction is also important. So with empathy, using things like coaching and mentoring within the organization, and critically kind of integrating the learning into real life, into the day-to-day, both by tracking people's needs, but also by how they can change. And that's really what underpins this kind of human-centric approach, which actually needs nicely into next topic of learning in the flow of work. Andrew, back to you.
Thanks. So the next topic is what we call learning in the flow of work. It really is about embedded learning in what you do. I mean, years back, it was referred to perhaps as performance support systems, or in some circumstances, online systems that provide kind of always-on support. But we work with organizations where they're trying to drive, a fully embedded learning culture into their workplace, such as meaning that the barriers or the areas between work and learning are completely blurred. So to one extent, it could be growing your learning blends to such an extent that it's about kind of space practice at all times, nudging at a regular basis, forever kind of pushing, as Ella was saying, kind of personalized strategies to drive what those different learners need at all times. But it's definitely about maintaining contact with learners, and I think the other way around as well, learners maintaining contact with each other and with the organization at all times about what they need and what they're getting. Yes, it could be about performance support. It's certainly about a learning mindset as well. It's kind of, I would ask a question of all of us, which is, to what extent every day do you think about your learning? And if you can say yes, every day, at least once or twice or 3 times, I'm thinking about, I must get better at this, I must do this because it'll enable me to get better, then you're in I think, a learning mindset. However, one thing I do know is, moving forward, Alice, is that we are all under immense time pressure in the work we're doing, and that whichever way you look at embedding learning in the flow of work, it's a hard task to break in. It's either a hard push where we're delivering learning out, or it's a hard pull from learners. We're expecting a culture change, a culture shift, and we're expecting learners to draw their learning themselves. So either way, to change the way people treat their learning is difficult. And so some of the blockers, as you could understand from that, are sort of old views of learning. It's all about events, certification, courses. That's not learning in the flow of work. And systems and technology may well be doing the same. Enablers would be perhaps changing the way people think through a big bang initiative of some sort, piloting new ways of learning, role modeling and capturing success stories of where it's working for people, and telling those stories are really other very good suggestions.
Andrew, I've had a really nice question come in. It's actually something we've been talking about recently, from Charles Jennings, asking, how do we feel about referring to people as learners rather than as workers or employees? I wonder whether referring to learners really drives us being L&D, into a formal learning box rather than really supporting learning in the flow of work.
Yeah.
Been a hot topic.
Nice question. Good to hear from you, Charles. I mean, we refer to people as people. That's the first answer I would give. We don't like the term, I don't think we like to use the term workforce or workers. People have a huge different range of requirements. But
it's not Taylorist society.
It is useful. It's useful to use the term learners for us, because it makes us concentrate on what they need to do to prepare for a moment in the future. You know, I always say learning is about preparing people for a moment in the future when they are ready and can behave in a certain way, as you know, when they need the knowledge, skills, attitudes, decision-making skills to do so. And so calling them that is a good state of mind for us to be in, I believe. But it's a very good question.
There has been lots of chat within there about workforce. You know, so I think one of the things that we try and do is focus back on the individual, and that's why we use learners typically, because it just helps us to think about the person first and foremost. But we've also been talking about, like we were just saying, on human-centered design and putting the human first and at the heart of it. Great question.
Thank you for questions. We will try and get to some of them towards the end. And by the way, Ella and I intend to stay on past the half hour and the next 5 minutes to answer some of those questions for any of you who want to stay. Moving on.
So the MVP mindset. So most of you will know a minimum viable product is obviously one that does just enough to validate an early hypothesis. And really it's about meeting the needs of people by consulting on what they want. And so often we do this with like paper prototyping, by testing and learning and adapting. But it really requires an appetite for experimentation and a willingness to learn. So L&D is historically quite slow to respond to organisational needs as they evolve, and in product development and to industry trends. There's really a greater need for speed. I think we've all seen that. And typically, I think we've heard, that there's too much of a focus on perfection. Actually, something, Andrew's flagged, like over design. And I think a real expectation that we have to be fully ready in providing learning. And these things are all impeding organizations from moving at pace. Nowadays, good enough really needs to be good enough in order to be able to have the kind of impact as quick as we need to. And this also, this MVP mindset really embeds the thinking about continuous improvement and having, if not constant, consistent evolution. So rather than delivering things for just now, we're actually building resilience into the organization. Some of the blockers with this one really fundamentally that it requires a permission to experiment, which can go against the grain. Obviously, some organizational cultures where there hasn't historically been a permission to try and fail. Often we've heard that simple solutions are not seen as valuable, and ultimately people really fear that you might not get another chance if something's not seen of sufficient quality. Sometimes might read that as complexity first time round, so things might just get disregarded. And a big thing here is basically that stakeholders need to adjust expectations, or we need to help them to do so. But before I move on to the enablers, I think another thing that can be a blocker, certainly we see more of, is when and how you need to engage procurement. And it can be a blocker because typically, procurement will want to sign up for a well-defined thing. So when using this kind of approach, you can't really see or define the end right at the beginning. So we may need a different kind of mindset when purchasing in order to kind of accommodate that risk. But in terms of the enablers for an MVP mindset, it's about being really clear with the limitations and expectations, and it's recognizing that we're designing for what we need, but nothing overly shiny and not all the bells and whistles. And we might do that by sharing the value of experimentation, getting the sponsorship for it. For example, saying the benefit is engagement or cost saving or effectiveness or time to delivery. And ultimately that really close and frequent collaboration within the organization will help us to get to the end point quicker. So those are the enablers for the MVP mindset, which I think fundamentally can change the nature and the way that we're supporting the organization to deliver on the right outcomes.
Thank you, Ella. We've got a question for you before you go. We're wrapping up soon. I've got a couple of things that I'd just like to tell you in a second after this. But the question I'd like to ask is what you want to hear more about. Of those things we talked about, we will come back with our next webinar on the top 2 scores that you give us on these. So Alice, if you can bring up the question very quickly. Which do you want to hear more about? Select one of these: hybrid learning, talent mobility, human-centric learning, learning in the flow of work, MVP mindset. These are all things we could talk about for an hour easily if you set Ella and I off. Cover them.
It's been really interesting that this has been a really popular webinar. So we're really just keen to understand, and maybe you can pop this in the chat so we can see it later, what it is that you're most interested in and why. It would be really interesting to know.
So, Alice, if we can have the scores. And let's see. Okay, this is really interesting. Learning in the flow of work, hybrid, human-centric. Right, we've got 3 next webinars, Ella, to do there. We're going to cover. I think we're going to cover all of them over the course of this year. So look out for those. But that's really, really interesting. Right, learning in the flow of work. That's our next challenge. Moving on. it's important to tell you that we are running this workshop again twice this year. So do tell us, do come back to us and tell us if you're interested in joining a small workshop. There's a lot of commitment here because it's 2 afternoons, normally a Tuesday and a Thursday. We're running one fairly soon. We've got one coming up later on in the year. If you're interested in joining for 3 hours on 2 afternoons, please do get in touch with us. You can write into questions here or chat or send us an email or respond to anything you get after this. We would love to have more reasons to run more of these because we get great insights into what you want.
They're also great fun, and if you're a fan of Miro or Mural or any of those kind of whiteboarding tools, they're a great way to network, meet people, and have some fun at the same time.
Great. We will be getting you a number of resources. Alice, if you're able to send out the resources, we will be sending links to those or sending them out directly if we haven't got a link here. So if you move forward, Alice, we'll give an indication of what they are. We've got some great stuff on hybrid. So that's what we'll be focusing on sending out after this webinar.